Shalom, everybody. Welcome to Chapter 4 of Learning Lashon HaKodesh. Today, we're going to be reviewing the letter Dalet, titled The Door for the Needy. So, while last week we learned about the Gimel and Chesed, which were acts of kindness, well, today we're going to be continuing with the Dalet and talking about who those acts of kindness are benefiting. One of the first things you'll notice about Dalet is that it has the shape of an open doorway. So, it's seen in direct connection with the Hebrew word for door, which is Delet. So let me just draw a dalet over here on this door frame to give you that visualization. So the dalet also alludes to the word dal, which means pauper. And this is somebody who knocks on doors, somebody who begs for alms or donations. Gimel, the previous letter, taught us to help create a growth and a nourishment with kindness for the dalet, the needy. In doing this, we're remembering two major principles of the Torah: to love God and to love your neighbor. So with this, we're fulfilling the latter. So let's further define the dal, the pauper. Here is a very popular citation in the Hebrew Bible in the Torah. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You shall love your fellow man as yourself, or you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So, understanding dalet to mean dal, which is a pauper, we recognize the relationship between the gimel dalet, that kindness is the foundation of human life. Kindness, defined as giving of oneself to others and bringing them most intimately near to oneself, well, that's expressed in this Torah command to love your neighbor as yourself. For a Christian audience, the Gospel account of Matthew records Jesus' answer to the question of the greatest commandment by first reciting the Shema, the Hear, O Israel, and he follows it with this command to love your neighbor, saying that the entire Torah and the prophets hang on these two commandments. So, in connecting these two, we see the rabbinic motif of alluding to the nature of the two tablets of the covenant, or the tablets in which the Ten Commandments were engraved. The first being laws between man and God, and the second being laws between man and man. So, now I want to show you another citation of an early rabbi who contributed to this conversation. His commentary regarding this verse, he says, Kelal Gadol Batorah. This command is a major principle of the Torah. Rabbi Akiva, a major sage in Judaism, he reaffirms the greatness of this command. Now, there's no view or sect within Judaism that I've seen that minimizes the importance of loving one's neighbor, understanding kindness as a necessary factor in humanity. Well, what about the antisocials? Right? What about those who maybe don't really want to go out there and talk? They have a hard time showing love to the neighbor. What about those who prefer to distance themselves from the community, right? Is there any excuse, basically, for one to not show love to their neighbor? Well, the sages actually teach that isolation negates life, and at the same time, it interferes with man's relationship with his creator. O chavruta o mituta, either companionship or death. There's a rabbinic motive throughout commentaries on the book of Job, where upon seeing the nature of Job's situation, in which all his friends seem to have been trying to find a cause for his suffering, which either directly or indirectly put the blame on him, well, the sages comment that Job was indeed, in a way, dead. Well, how so? The sages teach that one who has no friends is as if he's dead. No one to call upon, rely on, support. Well, he's alone. And the contrarian can easily shout, well, I don't need friends. My friends don't exist. I have God. And as mentioned earlier, Judaism makes heavy emphasis that the two tablets of the testimony were not just between God and man, but also it represented fellow man. Well, last week we saw the relationship between Bet and Gimel. And Gimel, remember, represented the man being in front of the Bet, his house. Well, now that interpretation goes even further to talk about the reason why the man is standing at the front of his house in the first place. Why does the foot of the Gimel extend toward the Dalet, that is to the left? This leg extends towards the Dalet. To teach us that the Gomel, the provider of kindness, should always try to seek out the Dal, the beneficiary of his generosity, and offer help without delay. So remember the story of Abraham and the three visitors and how he didn't just wait for the visitors to arrive at his tent, but rather he ran to welcome them, hastened to ask Sarah to bake cakes, and ran to the herd to select a calf for the meal. The Midrash teaches the deeds of the righteous are always performed expeditiously. The deeds of the righteous are always performed quickly. No time is lost in undertaking a mitzvah or a commandment in its execution. The top of the dalet points backwards, as you see here, indicating that the dal, the pauper, he pays attention to the one that's following him, secretly hoping that he's going to offer help. Because, well, although a pauper may be ashamed to ask, in his heart he eagerly hopes for assistance. And the dalet has a leg that's slanted backward toward the gimel, implying that the dal, the pauper, makes himself available to the gomel, the benefactor. So I also wanted to make this quick distinction because when we talk about helping the poor, perhaps many might get the image of giving a few bucks to someone on the street. And I wanted to make the distinction because when you give money to the poor on the street, that is charity. But and charity is called, I want to write it here as well. It's referred to as tzedakah, a type of righteousness, a type of charity. Which is still a good thing to do, but it's a different level of kindness compared to chesed, which is assisting the needy in a beneficial way, right? So while charity is good in that you're giving money to the poor, well, that doesn't necessarily assure that the poor is going to receive maximum comfort or get back on his feet. Gemilut chesed, which are acts of kindness, those involve a sense of effort to make this charity achieve its end as meaningfully and as kindly as possible. So Gemilut Chesed is not just monetary, but it's the personal assistance of a person in need. And with all of this, we're creating a firm understanding of just how fundamental it is in Judaism to seek ways to care and assist the lesser fortunate. Lo tikpots et yadecha me'achicha ha'evion. You shall not close your hand against your destitute brother. Rabbi Yisrael of Rizhin explains that the initials, which I colored in red, of this verse, they can be rearranged to form the acronym of Tehillim, which means Psalms. Well, what does that mean? Well, perhaps one might think that, well, a major way to help someone in need is by reciting Psalms, right? Which actually, in the case of visiting, like, let's say, the sick in the hospital, that is a good commandment, a good mitzvah. But in this case, the rabbis say, not necessarily. The sages teach that it's not sufficient to offer just words of encouragement to the needy, or to just pray for them and to recite psalms for them, but rather, true help includes constructive action. Well, where do we see this? In the very following verse. Ki fatoach tiftach et yadecha lo, but rather open wide your hand to him. Again, reciting psalms and giving words, that's just not enough, but it must include actions towards the people in need to help strengthen them and build them up. Now, just a quick clarification. I also want to mention that this refers to, think of very physical help. Okay, because a lot of the time, especially let's say in American culture where maybe giving to the poor is not, it doesn't necessarily translate well from the Torah commandment that applies to theocratic Israel and the Jewish society. Well, I just want to mention that a lot of people, instead of, let's say, physical help, they would opt for, again, oh, I would rather help emotionally. They might think that's what this is talking about, but not necessarily. I do want to just clarify that this chapter is pretty specific in the sort of physicality of that help, of these scenarios, because the sort of spiritual aspects of it, of building someone up or encouraging them spiritually, that lesson is reserved for a future letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So today it does require you to sort of think of that physicality and actually going out to help your brother. Now, I wanted to mention this story of the Chafetz Chaim meaning the desirer of life. He's a rabbi famous for his commentary on Lashon Hara, the evil tongue. It says that one Friday night during the Shabbat dinner, the Chofetz Chaim, he skipped the singing, he skipped the recitation of Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Shadet. Well, he skipped that song, which welcomes the Shabbat angels before the meal, and instead he rushed to recite the Kiddush so that they could actually begin eating their meal. And then after the food was served, that's where he went back to the Shalom Aleichem, even though customarily it's supposed to be sung before. And he was asked about this later. Why'd you sing it after? And he explained that one of his guests had just arrived before Shabbat and he didn't get the chance to eat after his long and tiresome journey. The Chofetz Chaim said, satisfying the guest's needs comes first because the angels aren't hungry, so they can wait to be greeted. The Kotzker says, it's not enough to merely contribute money. Be involved with all your heart in helping others. And there's another teaching that says that God created rich and poor alike, and this is taken from King Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes. Gam et ze leumat ze asa ha-Elohim. God has made the one as well as the other. So Yalkut Eliezer teaches that the Almighty created men alike poor and rich, so that they might benefit from one another. At plain view, one might think that it's pretty obvious to say, well, of course the poor benefit from the rich when they get money, right? Of course the needy benefits from the one extending his hand out. However, this teaching does transcend this physicality, and it flips the scenario to say, truly, the rich one, or the person that's extending his hand to help the needy, this guy right here on the right, he's the one who's being blessed when he helps the needy. Because by helping the poor, mundane man rises to a spiritual level, elevating himself to a sanctity not reached by many. So when the benefactor plays his role, he is granted spiritual rewards in abundance. Malveh Hashem choneh dal ugmulo yeshalem lo. He that gives to the poor graciously makes a loan to Hashem, and he will pay him his reward. The reward for Gemilut Chesed is manifold. Not only will God compensate one who financially aids the poor and cares for those in need, he will also grant health and life to his children and children's children. I recall a teaching given around the high holidays of Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, where it says that many are so quick to provide for their own family's table. That's just the way of life. Provide for your own family's table, yet they forget about providing for God's family. Well, who is God's family? The sages teach, that the Torah itself teaches, the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. So putting these pieces together, it's not just about the beneficiary receiving this blessing, but the benefactor is receiving spiritual blessings. The Torah regards the benefactor and the beneficiary as playing equally important roles. And this interaction between the benefactor and the beneficiary is a sense of building and helping each other up. So in this, the donor actually becomes the recipient, and the recipient becomes the donor. Shem Ha'ish Asher Asiti Imo Hayom Boaz. The name of the man for whom I have wrought today is Boaz. Notice this, the phrase that I've boldened. Let's recall the story of Ruth, where Ruth returned to Naomi, telling her about her day, and the Midrash notes the way that Ruth described Boaz's kindness, not by saying what Boaz did for Ruth, but rather she's saying what she did for him. The sages explain, this teaches that more than the benefactor does for the needy does for the benefactor. The benefactor's rewards are spiritual, while the poor man, well, they only gain temporarily. More than a cow, if a baby seeks to be nursed, the mother, the cow, seeks to nurse it. So chesed in Jewish thought is not something foreign to human beings. right? It's not something left solely to the divine, but rather, remember, just as Abraham did, we should recognize how we are wired to act kindly upon each other. A just society strives to make sure everyone is taken care of and that no one is left behind. In a Christian context, those who proclaim to, let's say, follow the teachings of Jesus, well, they shouldn't hesitate to emulate that kindness in making sure that everyone in the community and even outside of it are taken care of and that they are able to live a peaceful life. Perhaps, like the bystander effect, one might be led to believe that someone else will take care of a situation, or perhaps even to say that God Himself will take care of the situation. Yet, it's of extreme importance for everybody to realize that they themselves can be the instrument through which God's name may be revealed in these acts of kindness when we tune into that spring of chesed that flows down to earth. Rabbi Akiva teaches, why does Dalet turn its face toward the Hey, which is the next letter of the Hebrew alphabet? Because all who are poor in this world will be rich in the world to come. And if you don't understand this yet, no worries, we'll go over it right in the next lesson. And for a Christian audience, this is a message definitely seen in the gospel message, in which there are many teachings and promises in that this world's order, where the rich are above the social ladder and the poor are at the bottom. No, this world order will be flipped in the world to come. The poor will be at the top, the rich will be at the bottom. At least that is how the Gospels are, in my humble opinion, to be read. The message we learn from the Dalet is to have trust in Hashem. So this Hey with an apostrophe, it's more like an abbreviation for the name of Hashem. And as a closing message regarding the Dalet and the needy, remember the instruction in Christianity where Jesus or Yeshua orders his disciples not to announce their chesed and their help to the poor loudly. You're not supposed to announce it with trumpets. Your giving is supposed to be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. That's from Matthew chapter 6. Our chesed towards the neighbor is not for show. It's not to play pretend, but rather it should stem from our genuine desire to honor our Creator, and by emulating His chesed, we are honoring His creation. So thank you so much for joining us in today's lesson. Be sure to like and subscribe so that you can follow along with future uploads. Of course, we're going through each one of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So we'll see you in the next lesson. Shavua Tov, have a good week, and Shalom, Shalom.